Thomas Frank, thanks for visiting Planet America.
You got it, Chaz.
That's the way. Okay. Now, if I was going to describe you, I would describe you as a disappointed Democrat, possibly disappointed former Democrat. How would you describe yourself?
I think I'm still a Democrat as these things are understood in America. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a registered Democrat,
okay.
but yeah, that's about right. I'm actually, I have the sort of unique quality of being a disgruntled former for both parties.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did you go from Republican to Democrat?
That's my life story right there. So I started out, I was growing up in Kansas City.
Yep.
All the adults I knew were Republicans. It actually goes back even further. So when Jimmy Carter was president, I admired Jimmy Carter, and I thought he was so earnest, and he was, he meant so well. And I watched the Malaise speech. Do you know what that was?
I do.
And I watched that as a kid. I would have been 14 years old, and I thought, what a fine man he is.
You liked it. You were the one who liked it.
I'm the one guy in America who thought the Malaise speech was awesome. And I thought, what a fine man we have as president. And then, the Iranian hostage crisis and all that, and it just went to hell. And here comes Ronald Reagan. You probably don't know this. Reagan used to give little homilies on the radio all the time, these very short radio speeches, like 2 or 3 minutes. And I heard these, I'd be driving around in my car. No, wait, I was 15. I couldn't have been. But I heard them on the radio.
You're
and
fact-checking yourself.
It was very Reader's Digest-y. You know what I mean? And very like common sensey and this kind of thing, commonsensical. And I came to really admire Ronald Reagan. And look, I was 15. All the adults I knew were Republicans. They were all small businessmen. And they complained bitterly about government all the time, complained about government. And you're a kid, you absorb that. And they had this whole populist thing going where they were the producers, they were the working people, and government were the elites, the parasites who did nothing, and you lived on their taxation, right? What was I going to say? Like they're misbegotten, their power to tax these hardworking businessmen. Anyhow, so they had this populist understanding of themselves, and I absorbed that, and I believed in it. And when Reagan got elected, I was like, I was pretty psyched about that. But it was also, that was a bad time in America. The hostage crisis was particularly ugly. There was a series of energy debacles. And here comes Reagan with that sunny worldview and promising that he could make everything right again. And he really was, by the way, in this sense, this is going to sound crazy, he was like Bernie Sanders in this way. He was a voice from the past, from this reassuring past. And that's always how I think about Sanders when I hear that accent of his, like he's out of a World War II movie or something, And that's how I felt about Ronald Reagan. Now, I got over that.
Yes.
I got over that. It took a couple of years.
What made you get over it?
A couple things. One of them was getting a job.
Yeah.
And you discover right away that this vision that the adults that I knew, this vision that they had of how business worked and how what markets meant, that was all completely wrong, and that they were not the producers, that they were their bosses. It's something very different. And then it was also going to college, going to university, I should say, and you suddenly discover that the world is very wide. And these tidy little homilies that Reagan dealt in, this tidy little worldview, were, meant nothing in the grand sweep of things, or was almost completely irrelevant in when you started to understand history in all its enormousness, you realize how small and kind of silly these ideas were. Can I tell you one other thing that happened?
Go for it.
Okay, so I was at the University of Kansas. I was in the library. It's one of these open stacks libraries. You can just wander around and look at the books. And I fell in love with this, right? I'd never seen anything like that before. I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. And I was wandering around, and I came across a shelf of books, all with the same title, like 20 of them. And the book was called The Populist Revolt. And I'm like, why do they have 20 copies of this book? It was a book from the 1930s. And it had obviously been assigned as a required reading for a course or something like that at some time. So I took one down and started reading it, and lo and behold, it was about Kansas. It was about things that happened in my state, and I had never heard of them before. And it set off a light bulb in my head that has never gone out. And what I understood in that moment, this would have been about 1983, 84, and and I'm still talking about this today, is that those grown-ups that I lived among, and that Ronald Reagan and so many of other conservative politicians and conservatives in general, had their entire populist view of the world was upside down. They had taken this philosophy from these people 100 years before and had completely inverted it. I don't think they knew this. I don't think anybody knew it, but I suddenly got that looking at this book, because what populism was about in Kansas was a working class movement. They thought that farmers and workers were the producers, and that bosses and capitalists were the elite and the parasites and etc. And the adults around me had taken this and flipped it, erased labor and farmers from the picture and imagined it as this grand conflict between themselves and government.
Okay, so that transformed you. You became a Democrat.
Yeah.
What has made you disgruntled with the Democrats?
Well, they don't believe it either. This is the thing. So this great populist heritage that I'm describing, this sort of labor heritage, which was once upon a time, and we'll get away from populism here and start talking about the 1930s and stuff like that, but that's who the Democratic Party was. They were a party that was closely identified with working people and with labor and unions, that sort of thing. And they have slowly but surely given up that identity. And today they identify themselves with a very different group, with affluent white-collar professionals, people who do very well, live in the fancy suburbs, and are very successful in the sort of new economy that we're in, the high-tech economy that we're in now. And over the years, the Democrats have basically become a party of winners.
If I was one of those consultants, those Democrat consultants from the Democrat consultant class,
yeah,
I would probably say, we're just going where the people are. The working class society that you described from the 1930s didn't exist in the 1980s and 90s. We had to go where the people were.
But it did exist, and the really awful thing is that the Democrats had a hand in destroying the middle-class world that their ancestors built in the 1930s. So when I was born in 1965, the United States was, for, let's put it this way, for white people in the North, it was effectively a social democracy. We've never had social democracy in a European sense or an Australian sense, but there was rough social equality. So a blue-collar person could live next door to a white-collar person, and there was not a huge lot of difference between them, and the blue-collar person would be a member of a union, and they'd make about the same amount of money, and what separated them would be taste and manners and that sort of thing. This was a cliche in the 60s and 70s. This is how everybody talked about America in this way. It was the great middle-class society, and that's gone today. And I'm sorry to say, we can blame most of that on the Republicans and the Reagan Revolution, and they've never turned back from that, cutting taxes, deregulating, et cetera, crushing organized labor. Yes, Republicans have a lot to answer for, but unfortunately, so do Democrats. You look at the presidency of Bill Clinton, and he, in some ways, accomplished more of the Reagan agenda than Reagan did. Clinton got NAFTA. This is a free trade agreement. I don't know if you're familiar. Of course you're familiar with it.
The viewers, sure.
Yeah. Clinton got that passed. Republicans couldn't do it. Clinton got welfare reform done. The Republicans couldn't do that. Clinton got bank deregulation done, to a much greater degree than Reagan could ever have dreamed of accomplishing. Clinton got the Glass-Steagall Act repealed. This is a bank reform act passed in the 1930s. Clinton got it repealed. You go on down the list. There's all of these amazing things. Well, they aren't amazing. They're dreadful things. Yeah. These are, but he accomplished the Reagan agenda to a certain degree.
If I could just pick up on that, we talk at the moment about how there are 26 retirees from the Republican House this midterms and how it's a big deal. 1992, 1994, 1996, there were 88 retirees from the Democrats.
Yeah.
Is that the moment that happened during that 6
that is a moment, that was an important moment of transition. So the way I see it, the transition is gradual, and it begins in the late 60s with the Vietnam War, which is just this incredible debacle, as your country knows. You're very aware of this, and it gathers force and it gathers speed, and with Bill Clinton it comes into fruition. And yes, what you're describing. Look, if you go back to the 60s and 70s, the House of Representatives in America was actually filled with guys from labor, like blue-collar guys who are now in the House of Representatives. Today, it's not like that anymore.
No,
it's people who are really good at fundraising. Everybody's a millionaire.
Okay, all right. Well, let's go straight to Obama then. Okay, because with Obama, you've got, well, he lost during that period, during 8 years, he lost 13 governorships, 800 odd state seats.
I believe it's 1,000.
1,000, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, which I know was the most since Eisenhower, I believe.
Oh, no, it's way. Anyhow, they by the time he left office, they were in their worst situation since the 1920s.
Now, are you connecting that to the story you're telling here? Is that because are those results?
It has
because
something
of
to do
this?
with it, yeah. In my opinion, yeah. Because we look in 2008, Obama comes in. He's faced with a great challenge, financial crisis, the Great Recession. This is a kind of 1932 moment. I'm referring to Franklin Roosevelt when he first, stepped on the national stage and basically took a sledgehammer to the banks. And here comes Barack Obama, and I don't know about you, but I thought he was the Franklin Roosevelt for our time. I thought he was exactly the man for the moment. This is a gifted orator, brilliant thinker. Good writer too. I admired him, and I had met him. Right, he had been my state senator in Chicago. I was so excited, and here he comes, and it was all half measures. I mean, the essential things that needed to happen in that moment never took place.
What were they?
He had to get tough with Wall Street. He had to, take down the power of the banks, and whether you do that by breaking them into pieces, firing the top executives, prosecuting the top executives, or something completely different than that, rewriting the rules altogether. He didn't do any of it, and except for the very last thing, he had completely within his power to do all of those things because of he had the power of the bailout. He had seats on their board. This is what Roosevelt did. Roosevelt had a bailout situation as well, and the chief of his bailout agency went around the country to the banks and said, let's open the books, and then we don't like how you've been doing business. You're all fired, or we're putting your bank out of business. We're replacing your bank with a new one. They really did this in the 1930s. That was possible under Obama.
You think he could have got away with it if he'd done that? Because
oh my God, he would be he'd be well into his third term now. He'd done that. Let's just take one piece of it now. So he did fire the CEO of General Motors. By the way, I think that was a good move on his part. And but he refused to do this with the bankers. This is, by the way, one of the pieces of the puzzle. Why? What's the difference between a guy who runs a big manufacturing concern and guys who run these financial entities that have caused incredible destruction? What is the difference? And that's one of the sort of mysteries that I tried to solve in Listen Liberal. And the answer comes down to that they are they're fellow members of the professional class. These are people with advanced degrees. They all went to the same schools. They all know each other. They have great respect for each other's sophistication. And so the people at the Treasury Department look at the guys at J.P. Morgan and they say, you're just like us. There's this problem in Washington of the revolving door, where they go back and forth from the banks into the government. What I'm talking about is even bigger than that. It's simple solidarity at the top. What's another word for it? These people are peers. They're classmates. They are best friends.
Obama would say, I think, because he did say this a lot, he said, for change to happen, you need to push me. I can't do it by myself.
I still don't get that. Yeah, we did push him. We elected him. He had this huge movement behind him, and they were like, "Come on, let's go." Yeah, and he didn't do it. And look what happened.
I think what Obama would say though is that he's talking about mass movements, like Occupy Wall Street. It sprung up for a while, it disappeared. Yeah. And he'd say, like, where is the Tea Party?
I know, but where is that left wing
pressuring senators?
It's not a good excuse for not doing what the country needs. It's an excuse, and it's a lame excuse. It was obvious what had to happen. And had he done it, had he gotten tough with these guys when it needed to happen, and he could have done some of it right up until the day he left office, by the way. The Republicans couldn't stop him. He could have prosecuted these guys for this obvious wave of fraud that these people had committed. By the way, we did prosecute some people in America. You know who we prosecuted? People that took out loans and lied on their mortgage application. FBI went after those people. That's people like, that's little people. They never did anything to these guys at the top, nothing. And I mean, it's too late now. Statute of limitations has run out. But he could have done it right up until the end of his term. And he would have been a hero. The country would have loved him for that. It would have it completely changed the course of history. And he chose not to do it. And this is one of the great mysteries of Obama. And I don't think we'll ever really know exactly why he chose not to do it. I mean, I've given you my theory, but I don't know for sure.
We then go to 2016, we have Trump, and we're still arguing about it now. There seems to be four kinds of Democrats as far as I can see. There's the kind that say it's all about race. There's the kind that say it's all about economic anxiety. There's the kind that say it's economic anxiety leading to issues of race. And there's those that say it's issues of race leading to economic anxiety.
Yeah.
Which one are you?
Well, since I've spent my entire career writing about economic anxiety and the fraying of the middle class, I tend to think that's pretty central to the story. But obviously, I mean, Trump is an outrageous bigot. I mean, we've never had a man like that in the White House in my lifetime anyways. And that obviously plays some role. So I would say it's a really ugly combination of the two, of the bigotry and the economic anxiety. The way I look at it is, I mean, there's... By the way, here's something you should do. So if you look at Trump's, what they call his closing advertisement, he filmed an ad and they were running it in the last weeks right before the election. And if you just read the words to it and ignore the stock footage that he was running to illustrate it and ignore his annoying accent and all that, that voice of his that I can't stand anymore.
That's your biggest problem with Trump.
Yeah, well, it's one of many, But if you just read the words, it sounds like Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
He's complaining about the Wall Street banks and this, this economic structure that has bled the middle class dry. And and then he's very idealistic. He says that we are the only ones it sounds like Occupy Wall Street sort of. We are the only ones who can stop it. It's very idealistic. And it's, if you believed that, I feel sorry for you, but that's what he was selling.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's a bigot, and the sort of racist fringe in America was so excited by this guy. Well, as we all know, I mean, we've seen what they went on to do, but there was, I mean, every speech was about economic anxiety and the destruction of the blue-collar way of life, and he would especially hammer this home with his talk about the trade agreements, and this was, if you ask me, that is the. I mean, hell, who knows what. He won by such a small number of votes. Who knows what the factor is? So many different things explain it. But his hammering at the trade agreements really hurt Hillary Clinton because she was uniquely vulnerable on this issue for the simple reason that it was her husband that got NAFTA done and betrayed, by the way, when he did it, betrayed the labor movement. And they remember that. They are still pissed off about that. And here he comes, Trump, emphasizing this, hitting this with everything he's got, and she can't get out of it.
What do you think of what he's doing with the trade agreements right now?
He has no idea what he's doing. He has no idea.
You've mentioned Bernie Sanders. Obviously, the Democrats are going through what some describe as a socialist moment. That's something the hype. Now, do you think that is actually the case, or do you think it's just hype? Because at the moment, basically, we've got Ocasio-Cortez, who hasn't even been elected yet. That's one House rep.
Yeah, that's right. She's the superstar of the moment right now. She came to Kansas City, by the way. Had a big rally in Kansas City. So I'm really psyched about all this. But look, it's the Democratic Party has different factions, and maybe this is the moment for the left faction. I would love to see that happen. But I don't. I'm not the guy to ask about handicapping it. I honestly don't know.
There's a debate going on which you may not be interested in at all, where some people say with the Democrat socialist thing that you shouldn't use the word socialist because it scares people, it scares the horses.
Yeah.
Other people say, well, hang on, millennials prefer socialism to capitalism.
Yeah, but they
embrace the label.
Look, Bernie Sanders is not really a socialist. The guy's a New Dealer. He is. His program seems like it's right out of the days of Harry Truman, if you ask me. by the way, this is one of the reasons that I like him. I find him reassuring. I find him, you know, a figure from a long time ago. I like the guy, but he's not a socialist. I honestly don't know why he calls himself that, except for that he wants to distinguish himself from the rest of the Democratic Party.
Okay. But whenever you talk about any kind of left-wing policy, like say Medicare for all, that kind of stuff, immediately you get the how do you pay for it, right? Now that's happening right now with Ocasio-Cortez. She's getting drilled, even though she's not even in Congress yet, about how she's going to pay for everything. Bernie Sanders famously didn't even run a financial model on his Medicare for all policy, even though he's had for 3 years. Yeah. Is this something that the Democrats should care about, or is this a distraction?
Well, look, the first order of business is deciding that you want to do these things. I mean, we can assume from looking around the world at other countries that these things are possible and that they can be done. And so, you know, you can work out the details. I mean, you've done them here, you know. And so I assume that the real challenge is not figuring out the math, but is you know, persuading the country that this is the direction that we need to go in. I've always thought that.
Okay. You also, from the left's perspective, you're kind of running against the media a bit, because the media tend to be socially liberal, but economically conservative.
Yeah. Now, well, you know, and they see the entire world that way. That's who they think the swing voters are. That's what they think all, you know, politicians should be like.
Exactly. And Republicans
it's deeply annoying, by the way.
Well, this is the question. Republicans have their own frustrations trying to run socially conservatively against the media, issues like abortion, etc., and they say, oh, you just can't run against them. The bias is incredible. Now, the Democrats are attempting the same thing on economics. How do you run against the media when the media is so conservative economically?
That's a really good question. So this is you probably where I wrote this essay for Harper's Magazine about the way the Washington Post specifically treated Bernie Sanders. And they treated him with this incredible contempt when he was, you know, actively trying to win the nomination of the Democratic Party. So I read every op-ed and editorial they ran that even mentioned him from January to June of 2016, and they just hammered this guy. I mean, they hated him. And it's funny because, as I said earlier, I don't think Bernie Sanders is scary. I don't think he's menacing. I don't think his ideas are radical. I think he's kind of, if anything, he's kind of reassuring. You know, he's grandfatherly. You know what I mean? And so this was really disturbing to me. Now, that's not all the media in America. The Washington Post has always been this it's a voice of the sort of professional class in the capital. Yeah, and they have a very particular way of viewing the world. It's always, you know, budget deficits are very important to them. They are very suspicious of Social Security. You know what this is, our National Retirement Program. Very suspicious of Medicare, you know, of all of this stuff. They are very conservative on economic issues. I'm not all that worried about that because, you know, that's just one newspaper. There's lots of others. There's lots of other avenues you can follow these days. And I mean, the main problem is, you know, is the fight within the political parties, winning over the public, that kind of thing. Okay. That's what matters.
Okay. Let's go to income inequality, which is a major issue for both you and for America.
Yeah.
People, I think, misunderstand how you can solve it. They think, oh, just increase taxes on the rich. But when you look at the Gini coefficient, which is a major measure of inequality in societies, it almost doesn't move at all when you increase the taxes on the rich. The reason for that is because the major area in which redistribution occurs between America and, say, other countries is in America there are many less transfers paying out to poor people than in other countries, say Europe. But in particular, America, the rich people earn a lot more and the poor people earn a lot less than other countries.
I'm aware of that.
So how do you stop people earning more?
I read, you want to hear a statistic I came across like 2 days ago? It's that Jeff Bezos, richest man in the world, CEO of Amazon, earns as much as his average employee earns in a year. Bezos earns in 9 seconds.
There you go. How do you
That's
stop
America.
How do you stop that happening? Because how do you stop people earning more money?
How do you stop them from earning? Well, the problem is not that. The problem is that you know is other people earning more. It's not. You know, I don't have any problem with Bezos, you know, being the richest man in the world. Somebody's got to be it. You know, the thing is that I want his workers to earn more. how do you do that? I mean, as soon as you frame the question that way, you can see the answer. Allow them to form unions again. I mean, labor unions have been getting beaten up in America since the early 1980s. I mean, it's been a wipeout for them. And not because people don't want to join unions. It's because it is, the law is structured in such a way so it's virtually impossible to do. And
which is my next question.
Yeah, so this is like, we always talk about, the right wing in America hates the idea of redistribution, of the government stepping in and, redistributing income, et cetera, et cetera. You don't need that to happen. You need, workers have to be able to form their traditional organizations and be able to bargain collectively with management, and problem will solve itself. If you make sure that this happens in a fair and level playing field kind of way.
But the Supreme Court has ruled that is really easy to free ride off a union, so that basically there's no incentive to join a union. What do you do?
I know, and there are, the right in America has been, unions are the great enemy for them. This is, this very long-term campaign of war on organized labor, war on taxes, war on regulation, but especially war on organized labor. And they have succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. I mean, it is virtually impossible to form a union in the private sector nowadays in America. Management finds out who the ringleaders are and they fire them. Now that's illegal. But the enforcement of that law is next to nothing. It's basically, they just don't bother enforcing it. It's very hard to enforce it. And, unions have pleaded over the years as they've watched their numbers diminish and watched their power diminish. And by the way, when you want to talk about why America has swung so far to the right, a big part of the story is because unions are so weak in America now. And they were, you look at something like the civil rights movement, we know who the main leaders of the civil rights movement were, but they were also, the unions were behind them. Or you look at the movement for Medicare in the 1960s. Again, organized labor was pushing that. And all of these great achievements of the liberal era in America were made possible by organized labor. And with them completely wiped out, or flat on their back, it's very, very difficult to do any of that sort of thing anymore. So the unions go to the Democrats and say, we need your help, guys. Can you make it easier for us to organize again? Or can you do this, or can you do that? And the Democrats, this is where the story of what's the matter with America gets so perverse and weird. The Democrats won't help them. And this is, all the recent Democratic presidents have been like this. Obama, very famously, the unions wanted him to pass something called the Employee Free Choice Act, and he wouldn't lift a finger. The unions got Bill Clinton elected, and he turns around and gets NAFTA passed, which really injured them. Even going back to Jimmy Carter, wouldn't do any favors for these guys. But they, at every 4 years at election time, the Democrats go to the unions, and they're like, okay, let's, turn over the treasury to us. It's this really, really abusive relationship. It's really bad, and it's extremely frustrating if you care about middle class people. It's a horrible thing to watch, and it's even more horrible when you put it this way. Okay, when Obama did that and said, I'm not going to help you get this bill passed, and we're not going to make it easy to form unions in America again. That movement, the labor movement, is the bulwark of the Democratic Party and the bulwark of American liberalism. If you want American liberalism to succeed, and if you want the Democratic Party to grow, and if you want, Donald Trump to not be able to, achieve his vision of, this right-wing workers' party, which is what he and Bannon always talk about. If you want those things to happen, you need to make it possible for people to form unions again. You need to make it possible to have a healthy labor movement in America. And for whatever reason, the Democrats can't grasp this. They can't understand this. And it just goes on. It's the most frustrating. It's one of the many extremely frustrating aspects of American politics, as you can see.
I can tell. Hang in there. You're in Australia now. Is part of the problem that it's just easier to scaremonger and tear things down than to build them up? Like, you take Obamacare, for instance. Obama did not start off with nearly as conservative a policy as it became.
Right.
But step by step, people were scaremongering,
Yeah.
people were like, and it's hard to fight against that when you're trying to advance a policy, and it's really easy to just repeal.
Yeah, and it's also, Obama didn't start anyway. What he should have done, look, when we talk about the sort of the failures of the Obama years, or the disappointments, I should say, of the Obama years, a lot of them are because they just, he should have started out much farther to the left and made the Republicans bargain him back. But he wanted to have something that was bipartisan. The Democrats, I don't know if you're aware of this, they have this kind of fascination with bipartisanship and with consensus. They want everything they do to be agreed upon by both parties. I don't know why. I mean, the Republicans, they don't give a shit about that, right? I'm sorry. They don't give a...
Fine, we swear all the time.
They don't give a damn about that. But the Democrats, this is almost an obsession for them, as it is for the Washington Post and the Washington Press Corps, that everything has to be bipartisan. And Obama wanted that for his health care proposal. He also wanted that for his stimulus package. He also wanted that for his Wall Street reform. And it took him a really long time. Actually, I don't know if he ever realized it. I was going to say it took him a long time to figure out that the Republicans were playing him. That these guys, they don't play fair. These guys are born to obstruct, They're really, really, really good at stringing it out and playing him along. And watching that happen was, I live in Washington, or in the suburbs anyway. It was so massively frustrating. Chuck Grassley, the senator from Iowa, who was like, I don't know, I need to think about this some more. Maybe you'll get my vote, maybe you won't. Maybe you should make some more concessions to me. And Obama's like, okay, here's some more concessions. And then after like a month, and then Ted Kennedy dies, because they're dragging it on and on and on. And a month passes, 2 months pass, and then Grassley's like, no, you don't get my vote. And Obama should have immediately, at that point, said, okay, we're going back to square one, to the ultra proposal, and too bad. All the concessions are off the table. He didn't do that. And I don't really understand why he played the game that way, except for his own, in this sense, he's very typical of the liberal class in America, that he himself worships at the shrine of bipartisanship and consensus. But he had standing right next to him all through this Rahm Emanuel, one of the toughest, meanest players in American politics. This guy should have been able to figure this out. It's in some ways it's not. And also, I mean, so many people like me, for example, had written books about how the Republicans don't play fair. I wrote a whole book about this.
You should have
Came
read
out
your
in
book.
2008. It's like there's very little excuse for him not knowing that these guys weren't going to that they weren't going to play fair.
Another major difference between Republicans and Democrats, I feel, is that Republicans do grassroots better. They run for school boards. They vote in midterms. Like even now in this 2018 midterm, which you'd think there's a lot of hype about, you've still got only 28% of young adults saying that they're sure they're going to vote versus 74% of seniors. Why wouldn't Democrats and all politicians play for the seniors rather than for the youths?
Well, look, the Republican Party is very, very, very good at the political game. We could talk about this for hours. It is a fascinating subject, the way they play politics, and the Democrats, by contrast, so the Republicans come out of the business community, and so they understand the world that way, and they are dynamic, and they punch way above their weight, if you know what I mean. This is a party that ought to be a minority, and in fact is, and yet they have been more or less in charge since the days of Reagan, or the days of Nixon, if you want to go back that far. I mean, they have been the dominant party, and the Democrats, who ought to be the majority party, and in fact, Hillary did get more votes than Trump. They act as though they act like the weak party in the system. They, always looking for bipartisanship, always looking for consensus, always afraid to assert themselves. They don't want to go too far. And it's a really weird dynamic, and it's extremely frustrating. Are you familiar with game theory?
I am.
Not the band, but the economic concept. So if you have two actors in a system, and the system is limited by law, and you can't bring any more actors in, it almost becomes, you can predict how they're going to behave. One party in the system says, I'm going to constantly, or well, no, let's go back. One party of the system says, I'm going to seek out consensus. I'm going to constantly extend my hand and move to the middle. And the other party says, oh, is that so? Well, I'm going to constantly move the goalposts to the right.
It's
and
a
I'm going to
simple game
make
theory
you.
problem.
It is simple game theory. I'm going to constantly make you want to move to the center. Well, look, the center's over here now, and they say this. Tom DeLay, do you remember Tom DeLay? Tom DeLay says this in his memoirs that Bill Clinton was always trying to move to the center, always trying to triangulate all this stuff. So we just kept moving the center to the right. It's like, guys, they admitted it.
But yet, when you read Republican activists, they say the same thing the opposite way around. Are they delusional?
I don't know about that. The Republican activists are a really interesting bunch of people, but they are very, they have a vision of something that is pretty far off the charts. I mean, you have to sort of marvel at the Republican achievement. You look at what they've done over the years. Okay, to redistribute wealth upwards in this incredible way that they have, and to tear at the fabric of the middle class society in the way that they have. The achievements of the thing of what they've accomplished are absolutely extraordinary, and also extremely unpopular. Okay, the economic things that they have done to my country are massively unpopular, and yet they get away with it, and they get away with it, and they get away with it, on and on and on. And the achievement of this it boggles the mind. This is why I am absolutely fascinated by the Republicans. I mean, a little less. The Democrats are interesting too, but the Republicans are the ones who you just marvel that they've been able to pull this off.
Well, that's a whole other interview.
I know. I mean, like to wreck the middle class society. Like what country would vote for that? By the way, this is the great project of my life. We talked earlier about my childhood admiration for Ronald Reagan, and when I got over that, when I sort of woke up from that dream, I said to myself, why would a democracy, the greatest democracy in the world, this is a country, U.S. isn't just a formal democracy, we believe in it. This is the land of Thomas Jefferson. We are, that's who we are to our core. Why would a democracy endorse an economic agenda that wrecks the middle class and that wrecks this way of life that we all love? Why would we ever do that? And answering that question has been the project of my life. This is what I've spent my entire career working on, trying to answer that.
Finally, what advice would you give to the Democrats to how to beat Trump in 2020, and what do you think is actually going to happen?
So look, I've been saying the same thing. I wrote "What's the Matter with Kansas" in how long ago was that now? Almost 15 years ago now. And it's a book about right-wing populism and how the conservative movement is reaching out for working class voters, specifically white working class voters, and slowly but surely winning them over. They haven't won them all over, but they've been progressing along these lines ever since the 1970s. And I wrote that, was published in 2004. And I have stuck with the same proposed solution ever since then. And that is simply that, look at who they're winning over, go out and do something about it. Do something to stop them from taking these white working class voters away. Now, the Democrats have tried various things along the way to stop this. Bill Clinton bid for the bigot vote. You remember this? Welfare reform, they called it. And the other thing is the 1994 crime bill. And if you ask me, these are some of the most monstrous things that the Democratic Party has ever done. I am ashamed that I voted for Bill Clinton. I remember the day welfare reform was passed by Congress. I was in Chicago. I was so angry. I just couldn't believe that he had done that. That I had voted for this guy and he went out and did this. And that's not the strategy that they should take. If you ask me, you're asking me, so I'm going to tell you. Yes. I never want to see them do that again, bid for the bigot vote. What you do when you're faced with the white working class walking away from the party of the left, you reach out for them in the way that a party of the left reaches out for working class people. You don't emphasize the whiteness, you emphasize the working classness. and you reach out to them on economic issues in a lot of the ways that Bernie Sanders was proposing to do. And that, I think, can stop them. Now, that's what they should do. And I've, over the years, written about the many, many, many different ways that this can play out in, political proposals and in reality and stuff like that. But the question of what they will do, they're not going to do that because they don't want to do that, because that would involve them breaking up with their Wall Street pals. That would involve the Democratic Party having to, they couldn't party with the Silicon Valley guys anymore. They couldn't ride on the Google jet anymore because they would have to once again become a party of working people. They're very happy being the party of the professional class, and they don't want to go back to being what they used to be. They really don't want to do that. What they really want to do is scold Trump voters. Scold them. Not just Trump himself. Of course, they can't stand Trump himself, but they're angry at his voters. And their first impulse is to scold them. And I'm here to tell you, Chas, that is probably not the best way to win them over.
Bad politics.
Yeah, but it's so satisfying. One of the essays that I wrote a little while ago talked about the utopia of scolding, and that's kind of where the Democrats are heading right now. That's what they want to be. They want to live in this utopia of scolding where they can every day feel so pure and good about themselves, and this scold. I think the other thing that they're going to do is try to run the campaign of 2016 over and over and over again until they finally win. They'll try different candidates. They'll try different get out the vote efforts. Next time they won't give out their email, password to a hacker,
Well,
and they'll do it right next time, and next time they won't lose. And look, that might work. That might work in the short term. They've got some politicians who have who might have more popular appeal than Hillary. And if they play their cards right, yeah, that could work in the short term. The thing is this. The Republican Party is never turning away from Trumpism. If you ask me, Trump himself is a really lousy bearer of Trumpism. I mean, he's a crappy politician. He's a terrible politician. He's constantly, tweeting, he's constantly insulting people. He's constantly turning these different groups away that he could reach out to and possibly win some votes from. He's constantly pissing them off. He went after handicapped people last election. You go down the list of American ethnic groups, and he had an insult for each one. It's insane. This is not how you run for a higher office in America. And I'm watching him do this, and I'm thinking, no way is this guy, no way is this going to succeed, but it did. Anyhow, so the next Trump is not going to make those mistakes. Look, Trumpism delivered to them Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, for Pete's sake, Iowa. They're never turning back from that. It delivered the stuff that they wanted for decades, right? They're never turning back from that appeal. But next time around, after Trump is gone, it's going to be in the hands of somebody that knows what they're doing. A Ted Cruz, a Marco Rubio. And they're not going to make dumb mistakes like that. And so what I'm telling you, Chas, is that Trumpism is going to keep going. And the Democrats have to come up with a way of challenging this in the long term. And I mean challenging it at its core. So when Trump and his former advisor, Steve Bannon, talk about making the Republican Party into a workers' party, and that's their plan, and they talk about it all the time. You have to stop that, Democrats. You have to somehow figure out a way to get out there and prevent that from happening, okay? Everything points to the same thing, which is that they need to become the party of the party of labor again, a party that that is truly on the left economically. Everything points that way. I don't think they want to go there, and this is why I'm kind of pessimistic about my country's future.
On that note, Thomas Frank, thanks for visiting Plain America.
Chas, so great to be here.